Hello, Assalamu alaikum and good evening. Welcome to another episode of the Classics Show. I am your host, SHABNAM RIAZ. As I always say, it's a pleasure to be here at this time in the week where we have the chance to talk about such fantastic things. Soul food is what I say, the whole week when you're going through so many things mechanically and fast-paced life. This is a time when you can slow down, you can enjoy those classics, enjoy art, literature, music, dance, all those wonderful things that keep us going, keep our souls refreshed. Today, we're going to talk about a very famous novel, and what we're going to talk about, the title of the novel is The Count of Monte Cristo. And The Count of Monte Cristo was written by Alexandare Dumas. He was a very, very famous French writer and widely acclaimed. And this book was the one that was most widely recognized. He also wrote a couple of more books as well. To talk about today's novel, to talk about the theme, the plot, why it's a classic, we have with us today in the studios Mr. Faheem Sardar, who is an author, corporate executive and trainer. Thank you very much, Faheem Sam, for joining us here today.
Thank you for having me again.
And I must say it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure, as
Thank you.
The shows that we've had before as well have also had very good feedback. So I think that's fantastic. It's wonderful having you on again.
It's nice to know.
Right. Okay. So when we talk about this particular novel, The Count of Monte Cristo, and what it represents, what the plot is, what the author is trying to say.
Sure.
It's hard to go, into detail, but in a broad overview, what's actually going on in this novel?
To be fair, it's a bit of an epic, and I mean, it is a long story, but it is a story of determination, human nature, revenge, and a little bit about love. It is wrongly assumed to be a story of love, which it is. Well, I mean, there is love and passion in it, but one of the predominant features of this story is planning and revenge. How a man, a sailor, is wrongfully imprisoned by a group of ambitious men who had issues with him, jealous issues or work issues or love issues. He is wrongly imprisoned in a prison where he was supposed to die, and after 14 years with the friend of after having befriended another prisoner, he alone escapes from that prison.
And he's after spending 14 years.
14 years.
Okay.
And after contemplating suicide in a 6th year of solitude. These are solitary
confinements.
Exactly. These are solitary confinements where the person is supposed to go mad. They're basically political prisoners. And after 14 years, he escapes, and then he comes back as the Count of Monte Cristo. And he exacts revenge on all the people who destroyed his life. And step by step, he destroys their lives.
But at the same time, he's also helping those people who have helped him.
Exactly. I was just about to say that I mean, he's very clear, he's very black and white about things now. Because we see two different people here. If we take away the titles, that this is a count, this is the main character, Edmond Dante, that initially he's a little naive. He's like a child, a strong child who's a sailor, who's a good swimmer, who's this, who's working hard. But then something terrible happens, and all of his life comes crumbling down, and his mind is destroyed. And with the help of another man, his mind is rebuilt, his personality is rebuilt. And when he comes out, he's not that child anymore. He's totally changed. He's very calculating. He's very methodical. He, as you very rightly said, he helps the people who had helped him, who were trying to be good to him. He hasn't forgotten that, and he's certainly not forgotten the people who destroyed his life. So it's a collection of all these things. I mean, there are lots of opposites happening at the same time, lots of human emotions happening at the same time, but beautifully interplayed by the author Alexandare Dumas, who's one of the most famous French authors, who was of mixed race, by the way.
Right. We will discuss the author as well in detail and how he comes through into his characters. Okay. So, as you said, there's a lot of transformation and transition in this novel concerning the human nature, the human mind, how it works, how we react and how we build our relationships and our lives in reaction to what we are perceiving around us. It's also sort of a tragedy in a way that, you know, at the time that he is imprisoned, and that is that wake-up call for him. That's his sort of, as you said, he was very naive. That's his end of innocence at that time, isn't it? For him to open his eyes and say, okay, this is the real world. Yes. This is what happens. Crimes of passion play a huge part as well in this.
Exactly, and it's that passion which he, I just have to go back 2 steps, and I would just like to add to what you just said. There is a change in human nature and the human mind, but there is a great element of monolithicism, as I call it. The mind, on the face of it, has changed, but at the end of the book, you realize, no, he had not forgotten who he was. At the end of the book, you realize there is that innocence in him still there. And the thing is, he's not very clear what's wrong, what's right, what he wants to do, how he wants to do it. Crimes of passion are obviously at the forefront of many things. But one thing which I couldn't, I just couldn't let go when I was going through the whole story, because this is a childhood favorite story of mine. And you know, having read the unabridged version 20 years ago, this book is 20 years old.
You were telling us. That's very interesting. 20 years to that book, and it's
almost the same.
Now it's being discussed in a television show.
Honestly, I never thought about it.
Imagine that if you'd known that 20 years ago.
Exactly.
Okay.
So one thing that does not escape the reader is the fact that how in his time of imprisonment, in those 14 years, that aside from the things that he learns, because people might not be familiar with the story, the other prisoner teaches him philosophy, mathematics, politics, and sociology and economics and things like that. But one thing that the prisoner, the elder prisoner called Faria, teaches him is patience. Be patient and control your impulse. Because in the story, we learn that Edmond Dante is actually a very strong, lithe young man. And he is able to do many things, even as a sailor. That's why people despised him. You know, he's too good. But when he's imprisoned and he befriends the other prisoner who was trying to escape, you know, accidentally gets into his cell, he gradually learns that you have to control your impulse. And this is something so important that we nowadays it's called impulse control. Now it's called a disease as well. People cannot control their impulses. Here you see that the man controls his passions, his impulses, and when he comes out of prison, he's honed, he's sharpened, he's annealed in a manner that he can call his passions to his will, not the other way around.
And he's also become emotionally intelligent.
Much more intelligent.
Which is sort of ironic.
Exactly.
That, you know, when we see in today's times as well, you will see that the person with a higher intelligence quotient may be less successful than a person with a higher emotional quotient.
That's true.
Because they are able to deal with different situations, as you mentioned, impulse, and be able to control a situation and not always be in the reactionary phase. Absolutely. Because many of us are in the reactionary phase without even realizing.
And just adding to what you're saying, I mean, I call it, and I've even described that what you just said in one of my books, it's the animalistic nature. You become more animalistic. You just react. You don't think. One of the most dangerous animals on earth, they say, is the hippopotamus, because he just reacts.
Which you wouldn't think so.
You wouldn't think so. But something that is even more dangerous than hippopotamus is actually the leopard, because the leopard thinks. You can't train a leopard. You can train a lion. You can't train a leopard. So coming back to here, you see the animalistic nature slowly coming under control to a point that Edmond Dante, he knows that his elder friend is dying from pleurisy, and he doesn't want him to die. What happens in the scene is, and just for the benefit of our viewers who don't know the story, long story short, Edmond Dante is a sailor who, on his wedding day, is arrested by people who
have betrayed him,
who accuse him of being a Bonapartist. And at that time, we realized that Napoleon was out of power. He was exiled to Elba. And long story short, he's sent to Chateau d'If, where for 6 years he is kept in silence, and he's going crazy. He's listening to the insects and everything. Then he starts hearing scratching sounds. Then he thinks he's going crazy. Just when he's about to commit suicide, he realizes that something is in his room. Something just comes into his room from the rock, and he thinks it's a ghost. It's a white-haired man with a long beard, and turns out to be another prisoner who was trying to escape. They befriend each other, and Faria, his name is Faria, teaches him all these things, and he teaches him how to be a good man. But above all, which we need to emphasize here, is he goes through Edmund's case. He asks him all the specifics, what exactly happened. Then he's the one who tells him, this is what happened to you. So in the 7th or 8th year, he finds out what actually happened to him. And slowly he builds himself up. But what we see is an impulsive young man who becomes a very controlled person. And we also see in the story that when he enters Parisian society again as a a man with wealth, and people are just bedazzled by his wealth and everything. There's only one point where his heart gives way. It's when he meets Mercedes again. And he's a total stone cold man, calculating all the time. But when he meets Mercedes again, his heart gives way, and it is his...
That's his weak moment.
That's his just one moment of weakness, and he turns away. I remember in the story, he turns away and does something just to collect himself, and that's the only moment where we see that a couple coming back together, where she is the only one in the whole story who recognizes him. So, which brings me to this point that I wanted to make, that when we as humans, when we start to control our impulse, we not only change our nature, but I think we change our appearance as well.
That's very interesting.
It changes how we are, and people may think of you as a new person, as a different person. Obviously, it's more strongly put in the story because you've got wealth and all these things. So just continuing with just to give for the benefit of the viewers, if you permit me for a minute, that when Faria is teaching Edmund all these things, he also tells him about a certain treasure. Now this is the funny part, because every time, now they have a tunnel between the two cells, so they're interacting with each other when the guards are not there. So Edmund would hear Faria telling the guards that, set me free, I'll give you lots of treasure. And the guards are, this old priest is mad. Anyhow, he gives a map to Edmund, that this is a map of the treasure. It's on an island called Monte Cristo. There's a lot of treasure, you go get it when I die. So anyhow, long story short, when Edmund escapes from prison through the death of Faria, by hiding himself in the death shroud of Faria, they throw him in the sea. He doesn't know that he's about to be thrown into the sea.
He thinks he's going to be buried.
Yes, exactly, and he's ready to escape from the earth. But this is a very critical point, at least in my eyes, that you have the element of water coming back into his life. Symbolic. It's a form of rebirth, because he comes out of this womb, and then he escapes. And there's a scene which I have to describe, which highlights the impulse point. When he swims to somewhere, and a smuggling ship, they pick him up. Who's this guy with this long beard? And suddenly there's this noise that a convict has escaped from Chateau d'If. And very calmly they look at him, because he's got this long beard, that you must be the convict. And very calmly he picks up, he's drinking something, and he's just totally in control of his emotions, although inside he knew it was him, but he would be given away if he reacted. So very calmly there's a scene that he just drinks, and he says, I don't know who they're talking about. And they're like, oh, it's not him then, someone else. So the whole concept was, the whole situation was depending on a human reaction, which he controlled. That is further elaborated when he goes down and he shaves. Now this is another critical, I felt it was a critical point. When he shaves and he sees his face after 14 years, and he looks at his eyes, and his eyes have gone deep set. His cheekbones have grown a little bit more. His jawline has become more pronounced. His cheeks have gone in.
And he's looking at himself after how many years?
14 years.
14 years.
And he could not recognize himself, and he knew that's him. Because
and then that's symbolic as well, isn't it? Because he's not just looking at his outer self, he's looking at his inner self as well.
That's precisely what I was trying to come towards, and thank you for that. In the sense that this book is about how we also have a mask on our face.
Yeah.
And people don't look inside.
Yeah.
And those who do look inside, they see much better, much more, much worse. But that's the real life, because now when he goes and gets the treasure, and then he suddenly becomes rich, and all of his earlier friends have now suddenly start getting lucky all of a sudden. His previous employer, Mr. Morel, he's about to lose his business because he has shipping debts. Suddenly,
and he helps him.
and suddenly out of the blue, those debts disappear. Somebody's bought those debts. But taking 2 steps back, we have to go to where this revenge starts from. There's a scene in the book where after the escape, there's quiet. Then suddenly a man appears after some time. He goes to Chateau d'If, properly dressed as a gentleman, and he bribes the guards, bribes the warden. He says, I want to see the prisoner file. And he gives them a lot of money so they stay out of his way. And he finds his name and he tears the page. So he erases certain things of his past.
Okay.
And that's where the thing starts. Then suddenly, what we have to understand is this book is not about just, determination. It is about planning, very careful planning. In the meantime, he builds up assets of people. And he starts getting information about the people who used to be in his life 14, 15, 16 years ago. He enters Parisian society, which is it's slightly debauched. They just believe in money. Money is an end for them. Superficial. For him, he's now wealthy. Money is not an end. It's just a tool. So what he does is he uses their weaknesses
against them. Right.
And the point I'm trying to make here is that you see a reflection of, now this is live society. First he was alone for 14 years. Now you see all of a sudden all these people in the book.
And now he's not taken in.
Now just doesn't care.
He is able to understand and look at people without being involved with them and clearly observe them, exactly what's going on.
And adding to what you're saying, the most I felt which was very interesting was he could act the part, and he was just acting.
Right.
He would just act as if he's a very he's a nobleman and he's very much into wealth. And although when you read the whole book, you realize he used to live very simply. He used to eat very simply. This was all just an act, so that people are drawn in, and all the people who helped him, they just can't explain. They're also suddenly so lucky.
Yeah,
their problems are going away. They just saw a shadow. There was a guy. Somebody helped them, and stuff like that. But the people who are evil, they don't get that suddenly things are going wrong, because he uses their information against them.
Right.
So, as I was sharing with you just before we started, that when I was a child and I read the Count of Monte Cristo, I read the abridged version, which was not, it's just it's an easy part. That was just less than 1/3 of the book. So it's not just about escaping. It's about being determined. It's about claiming back what's yours.
Right. Absolutely. I mean, the author here has, created a character who is showing us what empowerment really is.
Yes, that's true.
And the empowerment really, for a person to be successful, you would say that a person who is in fully control
of himself,
of themselves, given any situation, because, I mean, on a good day, when things are working in your favor, we'll all be in a good mood, and we'll all be, wonderful people to work
Absolutely.
with. And not just work, this is at home, in relationships. I think the most important relationship that we ignore is the relationship with ourselves.
That's true.
And again, the author has, he's highlighted that. The solitary confinement, imagine just for a minute, for solitary confinement to be such a major punishment world over, what does that mean?
Absolutely, and if you cannot manage your own mind, there's a comedian I just recently I was listening to. It was really funny. He said while running his iPhone or whatever, his iPod sort of got disabled, and then suddenly he says, it's on a lighter note. He says, "My God, feelings are scary." Feelings and thoughts are scary.
Right.
So all the time I thought I had a nice sense of music, but actually I'm scared of my feelings.
Yeah.
So when you're alone,
Yeah.
these things you have to deal with.
Exactly.
And it is very important to point out that in the Count of Monte Cristo, you realize when he's incarcerated, it's his mind that's being strengthened. What you said about, you know, about being stronger. Now, that strength comes from the mind. It doesn't come from being rich. I mean, it is so clear in the book. You can tell every time you see his wealth being displayed, you get the feeling it's just a tool. He's using that as a tool. That's not the end. Whereas the people he's interacting with, they're all consider that to be the end of life. Make more money, get more houses, do this, do that. And at the end of the book, you realize he just doesn't care about that money. He cares about peace. He wants peace. He wanted closure, got his closure, and then he sails away into literally sails away into the sunset. Now, what's important is if you look at the crest of that in the book, you have a crest that the Count of Monte Cristo has a crest. It has two words. In French, of course, I mean, it says wait and hope.
Yeah.
Wait and hope. And that's what the book ends with, these words, wait and hope.
And that is, you know, again, a huge message, because when you are reading a classic like that, the feeling, as you said, you read it 20 years ago.
Yep.
And here you are discussing it again today with the same passion, with the same involvement, because it stayed with you.
It's still there.
You see, it's spoken to you, and it must have, you know, other readers as well, it must have impacted their lives in so many ways. So we're talking about empowering the mind. The mind is the ruler of, you know, whatever is going to happen. As you said, that classic scene where his life literally depended on his reaction.
Exactly.
For his reaction to have given him away, or to, you know,
absolutely,
to protect him. And isn't that what we're usually doing in real life? Don't we usually shift the blame too often to other people and say, well, look, he or she behaved like this, so this was bound to happen. Do we think of the other outcome? But okay, if they did what they did and we reacted in a different way, what would have been the story? That's
true, and I think you're being very kind. I think we do this more often than we would care to admit. We just like to blame the other person. And this book inspired Stephen King to write the novel The Shawshank Redemption, which became a famous movie and everything. And in that movie, when you see all these prisoners in an American prison, they get these books from the library, and there's this guy, the lead character in that story, Dufresne. Dufresne he's dealing with these books, and his colleague, a grunt, he picks up this book and he says, Alexandare Dumas, the Count of, what's this? So he says, it's the Count of Monte Cristo, and it's Alexandare Dumas. And you'll like the story because it's about a prison escape. So we see how much this has inspired even the great writers of today. Coming back to the synthesizing, I love the story because of the control, of his desire to control himself, not others.
Yeah.
You see, it
Very
goes
point.
Exactly, goes in the opposite direction. He's not trying to control others. He's trying to control himself. He's very careful with his words. He's very careful with what he does. To the extent that the revenge that he exacts, he's very careful about that. He even forgives one of the people after having dealt with him. He forgives him. You can now go away. The other one person commits suicide. The other he forgives, and Nortier, I think, goes. One of the men, the prosecutor, he goes insane when he sees this is the man I imprisoned and that I've been dealing with in Paris society.
Right.
The blindness which I need to highlight here is the willful blindness of human nature. It's something that's like a blind spot that we want to have. We don't want to see certain things.
Oh, that's so true.
In the whole book, what you see is these people who are evil.
Yeah.
They're constantly brought up against this guy. All they had to do was look carefully at him. Okay, we've seen this guy somewhere before. And he's talking to us in our language. He's being so nice and polite and suave and debonair and everything. Yet who is this person? But that never crosses their mind.
So sometimes the masks
Yeah.
are something that suit us. On another
Quite
person,
well,
we
quite
do not
well.
want to unveil them.
That's true.
We want to stay with this impression that we have, and we don't actually, we're scared of the truth, aren't we?
That word you just used, scared, you see, we are scared of the truth. I totally agree with you. He was also scared of the truth, but he had to face it in prison.
And he'd been through all
he
that.
conquered it. And what did he do? He didn't become a mean person. He became a stronger man. But there was an outside influence, because this strong man was about to kill himself when
That was the
Faria
turning
appears from the
point.
ground. And it's very symbolic of rebirth. You see these opposites happening at the same time. You see, for example, he gets the light of knowledge in a dark prison.
Again,
A prison where there isn't no light, because in this book it's described that it gets so dark the eyes get accustomed to looking at insects in the dark. So he teaches him astronomy, mathematics, philosophy, diplomacy, and all these things, and you see that he's willing to listen. He wants to learn. Initially he didn't want to learn, but then he learns, and then he becomes stronger and better. He actually becomes a count, because I have to give references to the book. Throughout the book, there's only one point where a person actually accosts him and says, I mean, Monte Cristo, I mean, what is that? I mean, how are you a count of a barren island that has only scorpions and snakes?
Right.
And he very calmly explains to him, no, it's where I'm from, and this and that. So what I'm trying to say is, he actually does become a count. He builds himself up. But at the end, you realize that you think he's forgotten himself and he's just out for revenge. No, at the end of the book, you realize, no, he still remembers who he was.
And he's found peace.
He has found peace, but times have changed. He's an old man now. And the woman he loved, he doesn't live with her anymore. I mean, she has her own life now. So he has a slave girl who he emancipates. And after he emancipates her, she breaks down, and because she knows she's going to be alone. And he's about to go, and then of her own free will, she chooses to live with him. And they literally sail away into the sunset,
Right.
with hope and patience. I guess maybe I'm jumping ahead, but the moral of the story is to control one's mind.
Yeah, and not to be a slave to emotions.
Exactly.
I think that is the main message here, isn't it? Because
It is, yeah.
often we find ourselves as, I don't know what it's got to do with demographics, but certainly in our area of you have different nations who are known for being more
Emotional.
more emotional.
I mean, I would just add to what you're saying by saying that I think there's certain nations that are more descriptive, demonstrative about their emotions.
Yeah.
It just comes out in different ways.
Yeah.
But here you see. One more thing about this book, which it is a multicultural book. I mean, it's got people from the Mediterranean. It's got people who are Muslims. It's got Christians. It's got pirates. It's got. I mean, this is a story which keeps you. You're not just in Paris.
Right.
And even his house in Paris that everybody's so fond of, is not just a Parisian house. It's got the Orient in it. It's got Asia in it. It's got Africa in it. It's got Christian culture, Muslim culture in his house.
Is that one of the reasons for it being so popular even today?
I would guess so. I mean, I think the story is so unique because it's based on I think it's based on a diary note or something which the author Alexandare Dumas was inspired by, but it's a very original story. It's very different because you see derivatives of this. As I said, it's a Shawshank Redemption written by Stephen King, which turned into a blockbuster movie, is based on this. And he even mentions this story in his own story. So you can see the direct connection. He's like, I'm inspired by this. It is something which it cuts across many cultures, and it ends in Western culture. So that's not being from the West, you sort of see that very clearly. And a person who is in a very opulent society, or seemingly opulent society, he's willing to give it away just to be at peace with himself.
That is, it's sort of like he travels full circle.
It does.
He has been to the depths,
True.
he's been to rock bottom, and then he's risen from there. He's become a self-made person. He's mastered his emotions. And in the time where, you know, he's enjoying everything and he's in that time of power, he relinquishes.
Because I think he is not interested in power. He wants power for a purpose, and he uses it. The purpose has been achieved. You close the chapter there.
Right, which is very wise. And seeing that power is so addictive.
It is addictive.
That is something that he consciously makes that decision.
And what you just pointed out, you see it throughout the book. I mean, you see people who are still addicted to power, addicted to that seemingly opulent way. But he's very clear, which brings us back, you know, coming full circle, as you said. It's understanding human nature, and he controls his nature rather than his nature is controlling him.
Which is, one of the biggest messages in that book. Okay, let's talk about the author.
Sure.
Now, because I think that's really, really relevant. Alexandare Dumas. Okay, he was also a person who was, he lived a very full life.
Full life, yeah.
You know, lots going on there. Tell us about that. How much of himself has come through?
I think Alexandare Dumas, as I said, was of mixed race. His I think grandmother or his mother was Santo Domingan or something, and she was, I think, a slave woman or something of the sort. So you see that thing playing up.
You see that in the end.
You see that in the end. Actually, it starts from the center of the book till the end, until he emancipates her. I think the cross-cultural nature that you see in this story is, I think, it does come from Alexandare Dumas being himself, being able to see what another race can see. You see, unless you live with someone, unless people who have lived in Africa, they cannot understand how an African thinks.
Yeah, and what the culture is.
Exactly. If somebody's lived in the West, they can speak about how the West may think. If somebody's lived in China, that's the way. William Dalrymple is known as he's in love with the subcontinent because his grandfather or great-grandfather used to work in the East India Company. So it's a generational thing which passes on, maybe genetically or maybe psychologically. But Alexandare Dumas, you can see there is that, because when you read Victor Hugo, that's different. It's purely, it's more isolated, so to speak, but you can see these different cultures coming into his stories. The Three Musketeers is slightly different, but this is the most different book, at least in my eyes, by Alexandare Dumas, because the story is different. It cuts across so many countries. So much is happening. You see people you can see the descriptions that he gives of different races, and them coming together in a very perfectly chaotic way, or chaotically perfect way, however you want to.
That's a very nice term.
So I think that's one of the biggest strengths of this book, which he may not have desired. You know, I want it this way, but it just happened because it was natural to him. It's not something which other people can synthesize so easily.
Right. Okay, so you know, we're talking a lot about human nature as in the theme of this book, the transitions it may go through, how circumstances in life can change the person you are, for better or for worse, depending on how you deal with these things.
Absolutely.
So, you know, when we're talking about empowering the mind, where it all starts, how much does reading have an influence on, you know, minds of any ages, and how important is it?
I think it's extremely important to read properly. It's reading opens up the mind. It takes you to you see, when you read gibberish and when you read something systematic, there's a difference. So to say reading is the only thing, I would sort of qualify that to read something properly is the appropriate way.
Right.
To read, for example, things that don't really make sense, or they're all like jumbled up, they actually affect your mind. Likewise, when you read something systematically, it affects your mind, puts things in order. Reading is the ability to, which I'm talking to the youth these days in universities and so on and so forth, that reading is a way of transporting yourself into another world. Learn from it, feel it, sense it. I mean, it's not there, but it has been created there.
Yeah.
Get into it, learn. The first word of the Quran is Iqra, read. I mean, what else can I say? I mean, to read is to learn. But to learn, the cup has to be in the right position, not upside down. Otherwise, even where a drop can be caught and preserved in a cup, a whole gallon of water can be wasted on a cup that's upside down. Right now, just at least re-answering your question, I think people think that, oh, reading's the only thing that needs to be done. Looking at my messages on my smartphone is not reading in my eyes. Yeah. Reading means to have a disciplined insight into something.
Right.
Now, if anybody were to read this book, I can safely say that that person can see what life was like in the early 1800s.
Okay, I have a question for you now. Have a short answer because we're nearly coming to the end of the program. But, you know, for reading, again, we're talking about something that the characters dealt with so much, patience. Things are available on a screen, and, you know, with one touch, one swipe of the finger, you're onto another page, and you're on to tame ourselves again and to say, okay, slow down, pick up that book, and just disconnect. What advice do you give to people?
I think I would, the only advice I could give them is for them to ask themselves, what exactly did they gain by being so quick?
Oh, that's a good question.
And just ask them to repeat the fifth last point that they can remember of what they swiped away or swiped into. Just repeat the fifth last point, which should sensitize them. Look, I'm just flipping through images.
Yeah.
Verbal and photograph images. But I'm not really gaining any knowledge. Because when I read a book, I can see the society for what it was. Then I'll read a history book, then I can correlate, oh, this is what was going on. So it helps me. I mean, I learned something. You can't force people to learn, but there are many people who want to learn. They just have been caught up in this vortex of electronic media, which is not making them read. Honestly, they're not reading. They're just flipping through images. So I repeat what I just said, that for somebody who wants to be sensitized, just ask them, what was the fifth last point that you just read? They won't be able to tell you because it just came in the short memory and it's gone.
The retaining isn't happening.
Real reading is, it goes into your mind.
Right.
It imprints in the back of your mind.
And then the patience element as well. How can a person work on their patience?
Absolutely. I was a very impatient person, and when I was 18 years old, I picked up Bram Stoker's Dracula to read it because I wanted to develop patience.
Okay.
And I remember it hurt my head so much that I was like, no, I need something much harsher than this. That's when I got into Dostoevsky. So I read my first Dostoevsky at the age of 18. So I learned patience, and it helped me. So if we want to learn something, this is the way it is.
That's fantastic. That's a fantastic message for the viewers as well. And, you know, thank you so much for coming in today. And such an interesting book and such a wonderful subject, you know, for all those people who would want to read. They now are inspired and motivated to pick up this book.
I hope so. No, and thank you for having me. And it's a book very close to my heart. And thank you for discussing it.
Thank you once again. Okay, and with that we come to the end of today's program. So many things we've been speaking about: human nature, that beast within. How are we going to tame all those emotions? And the person who is really successful in life is a person who is in control. So until next week, stay happy. Bye-bye.